Hi, this is Michael Tolosa. I'm the host of the Layman podcast, and today I'm here with Elise Boros from Crew. She's doing ministry at George Mason University, which is my alma mater. So very excited to talk to her about what they're doing at George Mason University in Virginia, and how they're evangelizing and discipling students there. So welcome, Elise.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so just as background, tell me how you came to faith and got into ministry.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in a family that had me going to church on Sunday. Like that was a really regular part of my life, church and faith and family devotions and all those things. And when I was little, of course, I just sort of accepted all the Bible stories and things that I was learning about God. And it was kind of just something that I never really questioned. I assumed I was a Christian just because I went to church and that's what my family did. And it was later on for me, when I got into like the middle school years, that I started to kind of realize not everybody believes these things. And, there were starting to be some of those peer pressures that were pulling me away from the things that I knew were right, or the things that my family believed in and whatnot. Freshman year of high school was a real turning point in my life where I saw a road to popularity and fulfillment and acceptance that took a real turn. I just cut God out of my life is what I would say. I knew the choices I was making were wrong, and knew enough about God that I was like, well, I can't keep doing these things that I'm doing and like talk to God because I know it's wrong. So I just cut God out and pursued, relationships and kind of anything that would make me accepted with my peers, and got to the end of that year and just was in a real place of emptiness and regret and shame, and felt like the black sheep of my family, and really felt just so like I had heard the gospel a few times. I was involved in Young Life at the time, so I'd heard it, but I'd always kind of thought it was maybe for other people, or like I didn't want to go to hell, so I'll pray and then I'll be okay. But I felt that separation that I'd always heard about between me and God, like that felt really real to me for the first time. And I went to Young Life camp that summer, and when they went through the gospel, it struck me like this is something that I need, and I want to know God again. I want him back in my life. Like these other things are not working for me, but I thought, well, it's too much. Like I've done too much. He's never going to take me back. And so, very dramatic, classic, like moment. I was sitting at a lake in the dark with my leader next to me, with the stars and all that. But I just remember her explaining to me really simply, like faith in Christ isn't about us never turning our backs on him. It's him never turning his back on us. And that like, he was just ready, like arms open. I didn't have to do anything to fix myself. I didn't have to undo all the stuff I had done. Like I could just turn back to him. And, she kind of unpacked what grace was for me, that it wasn't like living this perfect life and feeling close to God all the time, but it was, what him pursuing me and me just kind of running back to him. And so I would say that was when I really like placed my faith in Christ, and my life started to change from that. And it was very slow growth in high school. For sure. I didn't have a lot of community and I was growing a lot, but when I got to college is when I met other people my age that were like passionate about Jesus. He wasn't just one part of their life. He was like all of their life, or impacted all their life. And it challenged me so much. I had never known anybody like that. And so, it was again, a long process in college. Like I went in thinking I'm going to go to vet school. I had a very specific plan for my life that God just completely flipped upside down. He ended up being my husband, but we were friends at the time, and he just kind of challenged me like, hey, have you asked God about his plans for your life? Like, why are you doing all these things? And so it was my sophomore year. I just sort of started asking God, okay, what what do you want me to do with my life? And very slowly over 3 years, he grew my heart from my plans and my goals and my version of success to realizing before I was a believer, afterwards, I'd always had young life leaders and older people like investing and pouring into me. And I was an RA in college, and I would have, 40, 50 girls on my floor, and one or two maybe grew up in the church or had anybody speaking any hope beyond guys and grades and success into them. And I just saw this huge need and really felt like God was calling me to invest in students and college students and kind of give to others what I had. So it was a long, slow journey, but that's what brought me into full-time ministry with Cru and joined and graduated. Yeah.
So I know, God's calling of us is progress. Like it's ongoing, and like we kind of reach these milestones in our faith. Is there like a point in your history where you would say, yeah, I became saved at this point? Or was it just kind of like a constant, like from childhood being raised in a Christian home, that it was just kind of like a constant progression of sanctification?
Yeah, that is something that I've really wrestled with over the years. I think like trying to share my story with other people and sort of, I think it's both. Honestly, I think there's sort of both. I think there were all these seeds and all these like things that were poured into me and knowledge that I had about God and things that shaped my worldview that maybe opened me to that. But I would say it was on that shore, at the beach at camp. I mean, there are even specific things like leading up to that. I had the summer before, I had read A Case for Christ by Elise Boros because I was like, there better be some evidence for this, or I'm not going to believe something that there's no evidence for. So there was lots of little things leading up to that, but that was the moment where I think grace captured my heart, and I stopped viewing Christianity as me like doing the right things for God. So I think both and.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I have the similar story. Grew up in Christian home, etc. But I point to when I was in college and I got into listening to a lot of like theology teaching from a teacher, R.C. Sproul.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the first time that I actually thought, hey, Christianity is actually, it's logical and reasonable. Like it's like somebody's actually like presenting a deep argument for Christianity, as opposed to my whole childhood, which was just believe this, like just take it for faith.
Right.
And nobody really diving deep. And as a college student, I'm like, I want to get deep, in this. If Christianity is real, then it should be deep, and
right.
I felt like that was the first time that I kind of viewed it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So what brought you to George Mason? Did you have any ties to the DC area?
None at all. Yeah. We, when my husband and I joined staff with Cru, we said, we'll go anywhere except we don't want to go to Penn State, because we had graduated from Penn State and I grew up in state college. My dad was a professor at Penn State. So great school, loved it. But we're like, I just would love to go somewhere else, Okay. And so we had thought, when we thought anywhere, we thought any other, big college football team school, like Big Ten, Virginia Tech, something like that, kind of big school in a rural area. And when Cru said, hey, you're going to George Mason University, you're like, what in the world is George Mason University? I've never even heard of this place.
Right.
And I remember we like did a Google image search of George Mason, and a picture came up of like the 495 Beltway, 270 just highways, for anybody who's there, just highway everywhere. And we were like, oh no, where is God sending us? This is not what we wanted. But it ended up being the perfect place. Like the Lord knew, he knew it was coming ahead. He knew the right place for us. And Mason Cru sent us to Mason specifically because they were really low on staff. They had a really hard time getting staff to this area of the country. It's a huge need. It's a really expensive area in the country, so it's very hard for people to raise their support and stay here long term. And so it was really strategic for Cru, and that's why we came to George Mason. So fell in love with it, but we're very like kicking and screaming and God, why, God, you're ruining our life. God, this is what we had in mind. So
That's
yeah.
interesting. So I didn't even know that about Cru. I work at Cru as well. But I didn't know that like you join as like a missionary staff, which there are two different types of staff at Cru. There's like paid salary, hourly, which is what I do. And then folks like you who come in and raise their own support and are basically full-time missionaries. And so I didn't know that the missionaries don't really choose where they go. It's like Cru says, we need you here. We're going to deploy you there, almost like the military.
Yeah, I mean, you can share preferences, but it really is, I mean, they really ask us to be surrendered to the Lord and trust their leadership, and that they're praying over it, and that they kind of see the bigger picture. So there are special circumstances, sometimes there's a couple where, like, I have a few on my team, one person worked for Cru and the other one has a job in the area. And so they're going to be in the area because of the one, the husband's job or whatever, or the wife's job. But for the most part, yeah, it is sort of just trusting leadership and really having that missionary mindset of, I'm going to go where the need is. So yeah, it's challenging.
Yeah. I mean, so I grew up in that area. I did go to George Mason for college, but in my adulthood, in my career, eventually we left there because of the cost of living, and it's so expensive. I think the county we lived in had the highest medium income in the entire country. Because just the suburbs of DC, that's where all like the contractors live. Like that's where all the DC contractors and people who are doing stuff for the military and everything. So that's a tough place to do ministry. I can see that. Like just being able to raise that much support. And we'll get into your new role in helping people do that. But just, back to George Mason. So your time there, just help me understand like what it is that Cru staff does there. How do you meet kids, that are the students there? How do you evangelize? How do you disciple these kids? Can you just talk a little bit more about the ministry that you do or did at Mason?
Yeah, sure. It is, it's awesome. We do a lot of different things. So I try to think through what's the easiest to share. I think, just imagine coming onto campus as a freshman, and there are student groups everywhere reaching out to you. There's sororities and there's fraternities and there's clubs and there's all these things. And so we start the August every year is this huge blitz for everybody, not just us in Cru, but definitely for us in Cru, where we're trying to really meet as many freshmen as possible. And we do lots of different things. This year, we did a new thing that I helped start. We had a Ben and Jerry's ice cream truck on campus, and students would they'd come by our table and they'd scan a QR code and fill out like a quick intro survey. And if they did that, they could get a coupon and get free ice cream. So it was really popular, especially on the hot days. We had a rainy day, not so good, but on the hot days, that was a huge hit. And so we get all these names of students that are interested, and we start, and this is what makes us a little bit more unique than some other groups. So we start following up with them one-on-one. Like we text students, we message them on Instagram. We try to meet up with them for a coffee or give them a welcome bag to campus with like snacks and ramen and a Bible and stuff in it. And so at the beginning of the year, we're doing a lot of that kind of outreach. We do this tradition, we call it Pancakes in the Park. There's a freshman area of campus. You might have lived there, or maybe you were commuting, but it's called President's Park. And it's just, we call it Pancakes in the Park. So we have church volunteers come out, and we serve like 2,000 pancakes with toppings and, whipped cream and chocolate chips. And we're meeting students that way and playing yard games. And so lots of events like that is our big push at the beginning of the year to meet new students. And that helps us, one, like surface Christian students who are coming to campus looking for community and wanting to welcome them in and get them plugged into Bible studies and those sorts of things. And also just surface spiritually interested students, which there's a lot of students that are just curious and they're not really sure if they want to pursue anything faith related in college, but maybe they meet somebody who's really nice that they played, spike ball with or something like that. And they think, hey, this person seemed to be friendly and I could really use a friend. So they invited me to the next thing, and I'm going to, come to this sunset party in a parking garage, or come out to their first crew meeting or a movie night or whatever. So we do a lot of that at the beginning. And then throughout the year, we go out on campus. There's a couple student union buildings, and we were just doing this yesterday, where we go out with a few different ministry tools that we have that are conversation starters. One is just a deck of like playing cards, basically, with different pictures. And we ask students to pick pictures that represent their life or things that they are longing for, or, is there a picture that represents who you think God is or what you think God thinks of you, kind of engaging in that way. That's a really fun thing.
So that's called Solarium, I believe.
Yes.
And it can be purchased on the Cruise store.
Yeah,
but it's really just pictures, right? It's just cards with pictures on it. Yeah.
And they have a newer, like an updated version called Snapshot, which is very similar, just some new pictures. But so that's really fun. And then we also use a tool that's very popular called Perspectives cards. And it goes through like 5 different categories, and we just go up to students and we say, hey, we're part of a, Christian student group on campus, but we're open to anybody. And we love to talk to people about their lives and hear their beliefs. And, would you be willing to share with us? And a lot of times people say no, and a lot of times they say yes. And so if they say yes, we just sit down, and it's little cards that kind of go through like the nature of man. And then there's 5 different worldviews they can kind of pick from. And who do you think Jesus is? And there's different viewpoints on Jesus. And so it's a way for us to listen. And a lot of times we find they start to ask us questions. Well, what do you think? How would you answer that question? And so that's another way. And then we keep doing different outreaches. Ask us this question and you can have free hot chocolate, or we've done Instagram outreaches, always doing different things, but trying to be creative and meet students and have spiritual conversations, have gospel conversations, all that kind of stuff. So that's a big part.
Yeah. So that area, DC, which I grew up in, very much a melting pot of different cultures, different ethnicities, different religions. Like I didn't, it's funny, just an aside, I didn't even like view myself as a minority until I left the DC area.
Okay, yeah.
DC area is so, like there's all sorts of different cultures and ethnicities.
For sure.
But so you get a lot of different opinions in the DC area. And, me as a Christian with no experience in evangelism at that time, I always thought that if you try to talk about Jesus to people who don't believe in Jesus, they'll be very hostile towards you. But then when I actually started doing evangelism, like later in life, I was like, actually, people find the topic interesting. Like they want to talk about it. So what is your experience on a multicultural campus like that? Did you run into a lot of like people who were angry with you when you tried to talk about Jesus with them, or like what kind of feedback do you get from students?
Yeah, I think that your assumption is like everyone's assumption. Like we're all terrified, right, to have these conversations or bring up the name of Jesus. And certainly, there's like street preacher type people who come to campus and stand in the middle with a bullhorn and signs and yell, and they are not well received, of course, right? Like that, there's a lot of hostility that happens there. But as we're going up to students and just saying like, hey, I'd love to talk to you, I'd love to hear from you. And then we're shifting the conversation, talking about Jesus. It is extremely rare to have somebody, I don't know. I mean, I've been having conversations like this for 17 years. I don't know if I've ever had somebody who was hostile. I think there's a lot of people who are like, I disagree with you, or I don't think that makes sense, or that's different than my worldview. But I think people are curious. Yesterday, I was talking to a girl who's Muslim, and she's a junior on campus. Has had her own faith journey as a Muslim, growing up in it, kind of questioning it, more embracing it now. And we had about an hour and a half conversation that was really in depth. And she was sharing what she believed in about Jesus, and kind of minimizing the differences between Islam and Christianity. And I was kind of saying, well, I think we're actually talking about two different things when we talk about Jesus, and sort of challenging her a little bit. And it was a great conversation. And she thanked us and said, I love talking about this. And I think more often than not, students actually thank us after these conversations. They're like, I never really talk about these things with people. Like, thanks for coming up to me. So, I still get nervous when I go out. Like, even though I have all the evidence and experience that nobody's ever like yelled at me or stormed away, there's fear. But most of the time, people either, regardless of their worldview and religious background, either politely say no, or they're curious, and we give them the options. So they're not forced to talk to us. So we have a lot of interesting conversations at George Mason, for sure. Lots of viewpoints.
So you said you've been doing this for 17 years. Have you seen any trends of like has hostile? I mean, like, so in recent memory, there's been a lot of like cancel culture type stuff. But in ministry, in actual ministry on campus, have you seen any like trends, or has it just been pretty consistent over your 17 years?
There's definitely trends that happen. I think that there was a wave like earlier on when sort of truth is relative was a real big kind of new idea that had, I mean, not new, I'm sure it's very old philosophy, but it was sort of like the big thing within college students. And so that was a really new thing for us to try to tackle and talk about. And that's still there. Like, that didn't go away. That's just not the newest, biggest thing that they're dealing with. I think a lot of our students now, which is interesting, and this has really been a big shift since the pandemic, because there's so much like mental health crisis happening on campus. There's so many students that are just really stressed and burdened and worried about the world. A lot of our conversations we've realized have had to pivot to, how does faith in Jesus actually impact our lives now? And not just in a theoretical way of like life after death. Students they're not even thinking about that. They're like, I can't even get through today. Right. So if what you say doesn't help me today, I don't want to know it's going to help me when I die, because I don't necessarily believe in that. So I think there are a lot of shifts. It takes a lot longer, a lot more conversations and relationship building for a lot of students to even consider Jesus. At a university like ours, I think when I started ministry, a lot of the more, maybe students that were born and raised in America and kind of Judeo-Christian type families or culture had a very basic understanding of sin, maybe the Bible, maybe they'd gone to church. A lot of our students now, even the ones that you'd walk up to thinking, okay, maybe this isn't going to be that big of a stretch. Very few have been raised in the church at all. A lot of our students, they'll say, religion was forced on my parents and they didn't want to force it on us. So they didn't raise me with anything. And so the students, a lot of them have no faith background at all, or maybe like a grandparent who took them to church a couple of times or something like that. Or because they're at George Mason, we have 130 countries represented. There's a lot of students that are like from a different culture where their religion and their culture, like a Islamic culture, right? It's faith and it's culture combined. So it's like very, they may even be more committed to the cultural aspects and the faith aspects, but it's like a huge part of their identity. So they're not even kind of open to anything else. So I think those are sort of, we have people from Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, think of a religion, we have it. And then we have just a lot of American students, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth generation, whatever, that are like, yeah, there was some faith in my family, but like my parents see that as a dangerous thing. So that has increased a lot more over the years.
Yeah. I mean, certainly, I don't know, before I was born, Christianity was pretty much the culture of America. Whereas ever since then, my entire life, Christianity has been portrayed as like the villain in media,
Yeah.
and just slowly, obviously, it's been eroding, and now it's not even like part of the culture anymore. It's like
Yeah.
it's fringe, and so
Yeah.
just starting from scratch is something new that our generation is dealing with, because before you did have context to talk about Christianity, and now you have no context, and you have to like cut through all of the distractions and things and interests that people have today and be like, why should I pay attention to this? Why
Yeah.
is this important in my life?
Yeah.
So it's a
Yeah.
new
And I
challenge
think
for our time.
distraction is such a big element too. Like
Yeah.
they have so many ways to escape from reality and just kind of numb themselves. And so it's way easier to scroll on Instagram than to think about eternal things, right? I mean, for all of us. And so I think they're just also, they don't have to ever have quiet or silence in that way. And so it's really hard to get them to kind of even engage in conversation. But I think they're hungry for that. They're not satisfied with the other things. And so that's why when we have conversations, a lot of them are like, this was really good. Thank you for talking to me. They might not agree, but they're like, oh, this was good to think about. I haven't thought about these things. So,
Yeah, I think we're, as a culture, we're, at least there's going to be there's backlash, and there's turning away from technology and distractions a little bit. I think I see that, banning phones in schools and stuff.
Right.
Like, I think the tide is turning a little bit there. Hopefully people can, and Gen Z has been kind of known for its going back to like analog, or to, back to things like vinyl records and stuff. So hopefully we'll kind of see that in their faith and philosophy and stuff too.
Yeah, for sure. They love their what are the disposable cameras?
Oh, really?
It's such a funny thing. And in the most special moments, students will whip out a disposable camera and take like a really low quality picture that they paid, $35 for. So, you just see it in those little ways, and it's funny. But yeah, hopefully that also crosses into faith, like they're longing for something more substantive. So
yeah. I remember I used to work for the paper at George Mason. It was called Broadside. I don't think they have it anymore.
no, they don't. But I remember that now that you say it. Yeah, that was good.
Yeah. So I was the photo editor, so I got to cover a lot of stuff. And I remember, you mentioned like a street preacher coming. Every year there would be this guy who came, and then there'd just be a big, huge circle around him, and people just kind of throwing objections. And I don't think he like handled it well. He just kind of like a one-way. I'm going to broadcast, but I'm not going to engage. But even while I was there, I don't know what organization hosted him, but we had like William Lane Craig, who's this kind of apologist, come and speak at George Mason, and I was like, "This is awesome," And I got to cover that for the paper, and I don't know. Does that happen anymore? Like, do you get any like Christian speakers coming, and like high profile kind of events that can be used as like a magnet for those curious?
Yeah, I mean, in a short answer, no. We used to. We definitely did that for many years. We would bring people in, notable pastors or theologians or apologists, and that was like very effective for a time, and would get a lot of momentum. And you would get a lot of Christians, you would get a lot of atheists. You just got like a lot of people who wanted to engage and debate and talk there. And that, I guess that's one of the cultural shifts where students, they're not, we have tried many different things like that are big and pull people together. And that's just not the desire of the culture. I think they're like, I can watch this person on YouTube. I don't want to leave my room. So it really has had to shift to like that personal interaction. Like that is kind of what cuts the noise. Maybe bringing in a speaker like that, because people don't have access. Like that was an amazing opportunity. And maybe they'd heard of that person, but they'd always wanted to, interact with them. And now they kind of can do that on their own. And what they actually want is to like go to coffee with somebody who cares for them. So it's been a big shift. And that, I mean, I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot. We did so many things like that, but just one of those cultural changes. And I think COVID also played into that. It's for a few years afterwards, like it was just really hard. We're working with a generation that our seniors who graduated last year, their freshman year was the start of COVID. And so a lot of them were, even if they were on campus, they were like completely isolated on campus and had food delivered to their rooms and all that stuff. And so, they were really shaped by that. They didn't have part-time jobs because you couldn't do that. They didn't get their licenses because they couldn't go to the DMV. Like, there were so many things that were different about this generation that really kind of made gathering with others a little bit scary. And we're still feeling the effects of that, less every year, but it's taken a lot of momentum even to get people to like come on a retreat again, or, do an overnight. Like, things that used to be so exciting became so scary for in very developmental years. And so the big gatherings are a little bit, I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Now they'll go to a concert, no problem. They love their concerts, but so it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that is interesting just to think of COVID being 4 years ago and people like going through major life events like college during that time. Whereas I was just like, it was just another job. I was at another job during that time. Like, it was just part of my, recent history. But yeah, being developed during that time, I can't even identify with what they went through.
Yeah.
But speaking, you mentioned events. Now, Cru, you guys put on, I guess, 2 major events each year. Is kind of like the fall retreat and then like the winter conference. You kind of already said this, but it's been hard to get people to come to these things.
Yeah, it's been getting better every year. Of course, 2020 they were canceled. 2021 they were like weird hybrid situations. 2022 it's 3 people in a 6-person room. But we've gotten a lot of momentum over the years, and so it's been easier. We have fall retreat is a huge thing that each campus kind of does on their own. And so we take students like an hour away into the Shenandoah Mountains. And that's a really important part of our year to connect with new students and to share the gospel and welcome them into our community. And then winter conference is a really big conference. We go to the one in DC because we're near DC, and it's students like all over the Northeast come. So we had about maybe 600-700 students this year, where we used to have about 1,000-1,200. So, but it's still this huge gathering of college students, and it's really focused on like going to the world and taking the gospel to new places and opportunities to go on summer mission, whether it's stateside or overseas, things like that. And then we do have a third thing is our spring break trips.
Okay.
We used to have this really big conference called Big Break in Florida every year, and it was huge, and it was at Panama City Beach, and that was like the spring break capital of the world, with like MTV was down there videoing things. And it was just like crazy. Panama City became a dry beach because of some really awful things that happened. And so spring breakers went other places. And for a few years that was canceled. And then we've started that up again.
Really?
And so it's kind of a grassroots effort of different campuses. It's maybe like 200, 300 students instead of, 1,500, but students are going out learning to share their faith on the beach. And it's a lot more like high schoolers than college students because it's a dry beach. Right. So, but that's really cool. And then we do like international trips over spring break as well. So.
Yeah, I work on the Cru website. So we've been building the tools to, connect people with these events and these, opportunities.
Yeah.
So, I mean, speaking of, if you go to cru.org/connect, we built this tool where you can basically find Cru movements based on your location and based on your campus. So I just quickly put in George Mason in here. And I see that you guys have a lot of different types of movements there. You've got the main one, which is for undergraduate students. Got one for Hispanic undergrad students, athletes, graduate students, ROTC cadets, international students, Asian Americans. So how does that look from a staff perspective? Like, are all of you like coordinating together? Are you all part of the large group, or do you all have your own ministries that you do?
Yeah, that it has looked different at different times just based on staff capacity. Sometimes we have had staff that are specifically dedicated like full time to working on a specific ministry. Right now we don't have that. And so we have a lot of staff that are kind of doing dual roles. So are working sort of like the regular campus ministry and also leading a Valor Bible study. We have one staff person who is fully dedicated to Athletes in Action, but she also comes to our meetings and, is part of our staff team and helps out with some other things as they kind of fit and welcoming the athletes in. So it really has depended. I mean, there's such a need for more laborers. Ideally, it would be awesome if we were all one big team and then we had people who had the capacity to be fully invested in some of these other movements and growing them. But over the years, it's the cost of living rise. We were talking about that, support raising challenges. Like there's so many barriers to people being in full-time ministry. And so numbers across the board have decreased a little bit, and we feel that. And so there's a lot of things that we don't have the capacity to have a staff member fully devoted to that. So we're all kind of working together on kind of general things, and then starting a lot of times like specialty Bible studies or taking a group of students to a conference that's, for athletes or for Asian American students or something like that, that's going to really pour into them with like-minded people who understand their unique challenges and the unique beauty of the things that they're doing and how that connects to faith. But it would be great to have more staff, and we have had that. It's just kind of every year sort of ebbs and flows. And
so you would say that there is a need for more staff.
Oh yeah, there's a huge need for more staff. Yes.
Okay. And that kind of brings us to your new role. You've kind of shifted roles recently. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Yes. Right now I'm sort of doing a dual role. The new role that I've taken on that you're talking about is being part of the ministry partner development team. And so that's something that I started this summer, and our team does a lot of different things, but there's kind of two main focuses. One is when new missionary staff join Cru, everybody in Cru who's on the field raises their own support. So we don't have like a central fund that pays us our salaries, benefits, anything like that. Like we go out and we invite individuals and churches to partner with us and to provide financially and to get us on campus. And so the new staff, they have a big task ahead of them of going from 0 ministry partners to, as many ministry partners as it takes for them to be fully funded and free to do the ministry that God's called them to. That could be stateside, that could be international. And so one focus is like walking the new staff through that process, training them, discipling them, keeping them on task, helping them troubleshoot, come up with creative ideas, praying for them, encouraging them when they're discouraged. It can be a really lonely and long process. And so just really being kind of their point person and helping them bridge the gap from starting to starting on campus. And then the other thing that we do is coming alongside staff who are already on the field. And, the cost of living, we all know, keeps going up. The cost of benefits and insurance and housing and food, like all these things are going up all the time. And that is affecting staff in really big ways. Here in the DC area, when I joined staff, we used a multiplier of like 40%. It costs 40% more to live here than it would have like in my hometown. Mm-hmm. Now that multiplier for the DC area is 60%. And it's probably going up because the cost of there's bidding wars on rentals here. Like it's just crazy. So a big focus also is, coming alongside staff who are very busy in ministry and don't have much time or focus to think about, am I getting full paychecks? We're going to have a baby. How are we going to provide, for our expanding family and our expanding needs? Or we're paying so much money on rent. Will we ever be able to put down a down payment and have a home and like stay in this area in a way that's sustainable, and all those things. Can we save for emergencies? How are we going to do this? So it's coming alongside of them and helping them have really good strategies and coaching and encouragement that this is possible. Like, you can stay in ministry and care for your needs as they change over time. Let's focus on this together. Let me give you some help and some skills and some accountability and encouragement, and like, let's keep you on the field. So I've been doing that a lot with our team at George Mason. It's a hard place to do ministry. We've talked about that a couple of times. It's a really hard place to live and to stay. And so that's been a big role of mine. And actually, I'll be doing that this afternoon with my team here, of meeting with them for 3 hours, coaching them and encouraging them and helping them to meet new people and stay in the field. So it's kind of multifaceted in that way.
So is your scope of ministry still with just George Mason staff and students?
No, I just do that a little because I'm here with them, so that's easy. Okay. But no, I do staff in Delaware, Virginia, Maryland, and North Carolina is sort of my scope at this time.
North Carolina. So I live in the just south of Charlotte. Okay. I couldn't find any Cru movements in that area, so hopefully we can get some more Cru folks in the Charlotte area.
Yeah. That always trying to expand.
Yeah. So I went to, when I first met you, it was at Winter Conference 2 years ago. The reason why I was there was to try to recruit college students to join our staff. Yeah. And one of the challenges that, I just naturally kind of identified is that, students go maybe even into debt to go to college for 4 years, thinking that they're going to, be whatever, engineer or something. And that's their trajectory or their plan. I can imagine how difficult it would be to try to recruit somebody like that to do full-time ministry when, again, cost of living in DC, sky high. The debt, if they took on student debt, they got all this debt. And it's, tell me how, like, do you do recruiting as well? Like, is that part of your job, or is it just like to help them raise funds after they've made that decision?
Yeah. My ministry partner development role is all about raising funds after, but on campus, we are kind of the front line for recruiting students, really, and recruiting them. Like, a lot of times it's taking that first step of taking a spring break and doing that on mission, or a summer and doing that on mission, and all these things that we're recruiting them to over time, a lot of times leads to us saying, like, would you consider joining us for an internship year, or joining staff with us long term, or, 2 years serving overseas or something like that. So recruiting is a huge part of our role in Cru, and trying to identify students that we think have the maturity and the desire and the, we see what God's doing in their lives, and we see that they could be an amazing asset, whether that's like in an office position in Cru or in the field in ministry, direct ministry. But you identified probably one of our biggest barriers is finances, and especially student debt. Student debt is huge. It is a very crippling thing for our students. And there are some limits to what, people can even have in debt as they come onto Cru staff. So some people who are really committed, they'll go into the workforce for a few years and work on paying down that debt before joining staff with Cru, just so that they're in a better position financially. I think also a lot of family pressure is a really big thing. And the fact that even our most students now feel the pressure to compete with the job market. They don't just need their undergrad, they need their master's degree. And they're so afraid of even giving up a summer and thinking, man, if I don't get the right internships, if I don't get the right experience, like, there's no way I can compete and get a job, because it's still very hard for new grads to get jobs. And at George Mason, and I'm sure a lot of other schools, we have a lot of first generation college students. And so their families have sacrificed a lot to get them to college. And there's different responsibilities that they have in the way of, caring for their families, kind of parents giving up their dreams for their child so that the child can, do better. And so that's a really big, and we have had some students who have joined staff with Cru and have found ways to care for their family in a way that's honoring while still doing ministry. But, there's so many barriers. And there's just like a lot of fear that I don't remember graduating with. I think we graduated feeling like a lot of opportunity and upward mobility and thinking like, hey, I could do this for 10 years and then move on to a different thing and it's not going to hurt me. And now students just feel so much pressure, whether it is like the financial pressure or the family pressure or just the fear of uncertainty in the world that they're just like so aware of. So it is hard. It's a hard ask for sure.
How are you with like raising support and stuff? And how can we support you? How can whoever's watching this video support you in your ministry?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I feel like in so many ways, I'm really blessed with a ministry partner team that has been so committed and faithful. I don't think I've mentioned this yet, but I'm a widow. My husband died 4 years ago. And so when he died, I had a lot of fear of like, oh my gosh, can I do this ministry on my own? Can I still take care of my son? I have a son. This feels like an impossible thing to do in ministry. And my ministry partners just rallied around me and have cared for me so well and really kept me on the field and in ministry. And so, yes, there's definite needs there. And like in the couple months, I'm taking a group of students down to Bogota, Colombia, and we're going to do ministry there. And so I've been working on raising support for that. And, there's ongoing needs, but I feel like I have seen the beauty of what a ministry partner team is in my situation where the people who are on my team, they're so committed to not only the ministry, but also to me and to my family, what that's looked like, and have just really been so gracious and so generous and so prayerful for me. So that's been wonderful. Yes, for sure. Prayer support is huge. Financial support it's an ongoing thing for all of us who are on Cru staff. My cost of living keeps going up as well, and my needs and my insurance and all those things. And so it's something that I'm always like having to work on to stay fully funded and stay in the field. But at the same time, I've seen just like, I would be remiss to not say I have seen the Lord provide in ways that do not make sense. And I wish I had known, if I could have told myself in those moments when we were joining staff or in different crises, like the Lord will take care of you. He is going to take care of you. Like he is going to be faithful. I wish I could go back and with what I have now, but that's walking by faith, right? Like you have to walk through it and you have to do it with your knees shaking half the time, but he does provide. So.
Yeah. I mean, I have missionary staff on my team too, who, are doing this, but also have to spend like half their time, making, raising support every year. And this isn't like something that's just a given when you join staff. Like you've got to raise support every single year and meet that number. And that's, I can imagine, very stressful, but obviously it's worth it. Worth the effort.
Yeah. I was just talking with a girl that I'm coaching, and we were looking through some scripture and being reminded like ministry partnership is God's idea. Support raising is God's idea. Like this is something that he's been doing for a long time. The Levites were supported by the rest of Israel, right? Like Paul is supported by the churches and says, those who do the work of the gospel should make their living by the gospel. Like this is God's idea. Sometimes it feels like a really bad idea when you're like, this is not working. This is really hard and scary. And there's rejection and short paychecks. And how's God going to meet these needs? But it definitely kind of cuts out that middleman where all of us, everything we get is from God. Like that's just true if you work for, I don't know, Apple or Tesla or IBM or whatever, right? Like ultimately it's from the Lord. But when every month you're like, I really hope the Lord moves so that people will give so that I can have food on the table. Like it definitely puts you in a different awareness of the need, and that like security has to come from him because it's not guaranteed, like you said. So, but it is a blessing, and it's nice when you get to see those parts that are sweet and you're like, okay, yeah, God knew what he was doing, but it
Yeah.
is definitely a walk of faith.
Yeah. I mean, I know we're coming to the end of the time, but there's so many questions I have. Like if for me, like if I wanted to go do full-time ministry,
Mm-hmm.
the raise and support thing seems like the scariest part of it. And as, and I think about what my family or who all my friends would think, because I'm like, well, I'm already making a salary, like I have a career, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to give that up, and then I'm going to ask for support. They're like, well,
Mm-hmm.
you were already working, like why would I give you money?
Yeah.
It seems like there's a lot of challenges there, and that people like you at Crew have to, like work through those things with people as you're recruiting them and helping them raise support.
Yeah.
So really love what you're doing and appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, if you're watching this and you want to support that kind of ministry, I will include your giving link, which is like your support team link,
Yeah.
in the show notes. Please, if you got the funds, please join Elise's support team. And you can even just like give just for a particular thing, right? Like just
Yeah.
for your
Yeah.
Columbia trip or
Yeah.
something.
Absolutely.
A
Yeah.
one-time
One-time
gift.
gifts are huge. They help so much. Yeah.
Okay. I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me on the
Yeah.
podcast, and we'll be praying for you, and I'll continue to support you as well.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah.